So yeah, Stefan is a freelancer, kind of bounces around between all sorts of different productions.
All
just
kinds.
Give us a little brief introduction to you.
Oh, geez. Well, I mean, this past week I shot a wedding over the weekend. I was a second shooter for a company called KJAD, which is not just any day. Great company out in Wilkes-Barre. And, this week I was doing, earlier today, actually, I was doing a gig for PBS. I'm out in at Arcadia University shooting interviews and doing all kinds of stuff like that. So it's I'm constantly doing different gigs as a freelancer.
Right.
It's great to have variety like that. I have ridiculous ADD, so it helps me kind of fill in all of those gaps and keep myself distracted a little bit. Last week I was shooting an elementary school play. They put on this big production, and we actually got really good sound from the board. I was excited.
That's great. Yeah. It is the place you'd least expect it.
Exactly. Yeah. It just so happened the principal's husband was like a sound guy, and he came in with his big mixing board. And he's like, "All right, guys, we're doing this." It was fantastic.
If we're gonna do this, we're gonna do it the right way.
Yeah.
So I kind of ask the same few questions to any guest I have who's in like a media related field. Well, first of all, like I guess very basic. How did you get your start in doing video and all sorts of different productions? Because like you said, you're all over the map. Weddings, plays.
Yeah.
You do music videos. I've seen work with for TV studios. What was the start for you?
Well, it really started with music. I was in a band for a long time. I was in a couple of different bands. You know how the story goes. And I was the one person that kind of knew how to use cameras. I had gone to the Baum School of Art when I was younger, and I just used to doodle all over my tests and stuff when I was a kid. So my teacher's kind of like, all right, go do this, at the right place. And they sent me off there. That gave me an introduction to Photoshop and digital photography and like all these different kind of things. And so later on in my college years, finally when I was working with bands and all this stuff, I was playing music. They would like, get a camera together or something, and they'd be like, all right, who knows how to use a camera? And I'd be like, okay, yeah, it's me. All right. And eventually got my own. Got more interested in photography, and I was doing it for other bands. I was starting to do like little music videos here and there, and since I was trying to dedicate most of my time to working with the band, I started to try and move away from like doing part-time work. Like I was doing kitchen work and like overnight security.
Right.
So instead of doing that stuff, I tried to move towards photography because, hey, if I can get paid to do this, then that means I can spend more time with my band and do more like work in that area. And so it just sort of like fell into place like that. And eventually photography turned into, cameras now have video functions. So you start taking videos and bands are like, yo, man, like, give me some footage of that. And then, you do it for someone's band and their brother hears about it and they're like, oh, hey, my company needs a video. Do you think you could do that? And you're like, sure, let's give it a shot. And you just kind of fall into these roles.
Right.
And so that's really how it progressed with me. I just started picking up, different gigs here and people would hear that I'm a camera guy. So, they would ask me to do random things. And for the past 7 years now, I've been working as a freelancer.
It's crazy.
I was living up in Canada for a long time, so I did it up there, and then I realized, oh hey, I have dual citizenship, and the United States has 10 times the population.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a better place to start a business.
Market to start out in. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So the last 3 years have been very, very nice. Yeah, and so I'm getting to do a lot more work in that sort of vein around here.
Yeah, and there's nothing like that whole baptism by fire almost thing, because you said,
sure.
it's a totally different. And we touched on this in your podcast, but it's such a totally different beast to start off in music videos and then jump into doing corporate and then jump into doing weddings, and it's just such a great way. I mean, there's no other better way to figure out exactly where you're lacking than to jump from one means of production to another. Because then you kind of strengthen all of them at once. It's
a lot of experience right away. Sometimes things wouldn't go that great, but I was always charging pretty low. That's that was just how it fell into place for me, because I minimized the cost of my lifestyle as much as possible. I was living in a band house. We paid maybe $100 each for rent. Wow. It was like dirt cheap, but it was tiny little crappy places, but we made it work. So having that support system definitely helped out. But there's all kinds of situations or like ways that you can make a career like that work just by like picking up gigs and working your butt off.
Exactly. And just making sure as many people as possible have that business card or have your name or can just as easily reach out to you. And
it's one of those balances. It's interesting where like you get to a point where you're like, okay, I really want to do this creative stuff, but you know what, like I got to do this thing, and then you like you're working on this this paid gig that it maybe doesn't fulfill you creatively as much, but you're getting what you need, like you can pay your bills, and then finally you start getting to the point where you're like, you know what, I can do some creative things again. And it starts to swing back that way. So it's just sort of the way that freelance career progresses.
It just rises and falls every so often.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm finally starting to get back to that creative part. Like I'm doing some interesting pieces with PBS and like this the wedding work on the weekends is like I find that a lot of fun, and I think especially because I'm a second shooter and not because I'm like
exactly
hey, this is the
once
guy.
You're the first shooter, it's a whole other level of stress.
But it's that's something I've done before too. Like I the first wedding I ever shot actually was someone who just sort of gave me their trust and was like, hey, bring your cameras, and here's like it was like $600, and that to me back then, that was huge. That was like all my rent for the month. I was like, okay, like I can just dedicate some time to this. And I made like a wedding film for them. Like it was a really good opportunity for me to see how much work it would take to do a wedding. I totally overdid it. So like it turned out really good, but I mean, I'm neurotic like that, I guess.
I was the exact same way. I started off doing, it was mostly YouTube stuff, and then when I first like figured out I could actually like make money off of it, I lucked out and that a friend of mine's mom was getting remarried, and they were like, hey, do you want to do our wedding? I think I got like $200 for it, which I mean, looking back on the final product, was $200 more than what that video was worth.
It's perfect,
but
though,
it's a good way to hone your style, and again, just like figure out where you're lacking.
Absolutely, yeah. And it like you said, you got that from your friend's mom, like that gig. It's so much about like who you know and who you talk to about this stuff. So don't try and fly under the radar. Like talk to your friends, talk to your family. Mention like, hey, if you ever need some photos for Facebook or whatever, just get it out there and do that stuff, and it'll start to kind of come to you at some point, which is really good feeling.
I guess that kind of ties into my next point, where it's like, what advice would you have for anyone who is looking to get into freelancing? Because it is a very scary prospect, I think, like just looking at it.
It definitely is,
because nothing's ever guaranteed.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you got to look at it with some kind of practical eyes. Like my first gig that I was like really chasing after was trying to do music videos for bands. So I was trying to become like, the photographer, the videographer that the venue would tell the band about when they're coming to town. The only problem is I'm trying to shoot only for metal bands, and like the touring bands that were coming through, they just didn't have the budget to like make it worth their while or my while, or it just didn't work out. So like thinking about it a little bit more practically, I was like, okay, you know what, there's like pop bands that come through the area. Like I don't need to just go in the genre that I'm comfortable with. I need to see what value I can bring to people who need it around me. And I ended up working with this band. They were called We Were Sharks, and We Were Sharks. And there's this great like pop punk band from Canada, and they're so much fun. We did like a party video to start off with, and then I did some like tours with them, like some short, 2 or 3 cities or something like that, or like a weekend. And they were a great introduction into doing more documentary style content, because they actually took me on the road, setting up shoots of my own, because they were like, hey, we want to do a party, how do we set that up? and they actually like asked me those questions and worked with me to set everything up.
Right.
And we ended up having a great time. Like the video's somewhere on YouTube right now.
If I can find it, I'll put it up on the screen right now so you guys can see it.
That's a fun one. It's I think it's called "With $10,000 We'd Be Millionaires."
I like that title.
Yeah,
that's good.
They're a fun band. But yeah, it's definitely something where like you got to look at the opportunities that are available to you. Talk to everyone that you know. Try and just get the word out there, because you never know when they're going to run into someone that says, you know, oh man, I really wish I had someone who knew how to use a camera right now. Mm-hmm. And they go, oh, you know, my buddy or my brother or whatever, you
right
know how to use a camera, and they call you up. And then the other thing is I guess like be open to opportunities that pop up. So like if you're walking around and you see some people who are trying to take a photo or something like that, like it looks like they're about to get in, someone's gonna propose, or like a big moment like that, mm-hmm. like you can go and offer to take photos if you have your camera with you. That's a great way to get in the door, and like a good way to start that interaction with those people is to just do it for free. Just be like, mm-hmm. hey, I'll take some photos, give me your email address, I'll send them to you. And then they come back and go, hey, those are fantastic photos, why don't you come take photos of our newborn baby or something like that. That happened to me this past weekend. I had a call back from a client, and I had done some family photos for them. They just had another kid last week, and so now I'm taking infant photos with them, and their older daughter, who's almost 2, is there. It was just the cutest time. Like we were reading storybooks all weekend. It was great.
Again, it just speaks to that like whole wide range of opportunity you get when you're just constantly putting your name out there. Yeah. And so, sorry, go ahead.
It's just like, about the value that you can bring. So wherever you can be useful, people will kind of scoop you up, and you'll find these opportunities here and there. It can be kind of fun. It's like an RPG. It's great.
Right. It's always unexpected and a little nerve wracking, but I mean, like you said, it somehow pays off in the end.
Absolutely. Yeah. Whether an experience, like there's tons of times where I've had gigs that like didn't turn out the way that I wanted to, but they were always learning experiences.
Right.
That's for sure.
Can you think of like a classic like this, like the granddaddy of like, oh man, I really messed up and learned a lot from this gig? Or
this green screen's making me think of one. There was a gig where I was supposed to do a commercial for. I was living up in Canada at the time, and it was for a medicinal marijuana company that they built a vending machine. And it would take your ID, scan your ID, make sure you're of age. It would make sure that you're in the system and all this stuff. It would take your cannabis card or whatever it was, and they would verify all this information. You would have like an iPad touchscreen. Awesome. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna green screen this thing, and I'm gonna put it on a pure white background, and it's gonna look really cool because they had it inside of like it was like an office space building, but it was like kind of not complete yet.
Right.
So there were like ceiling tiles down, like there was like construction in the background, like it just wasn't a clean area. So I was like, okay, you know what, I'm just gonna cover the walls with green screen and it's gonna be fine. I show up and I've got my piles of green muslin, and I look at the thing and I'm like, oh no, it's bright green. So the vending machine is bright green. I'm like, all right, well, luckily I can return these. So I send those back and I get blue screens. But just the act of trying to like set up these blue screens on these walls that aren't finished, that nothing's like a flat surface. I was just covering tools with blue screen and trying to light it up. It was gnarly. But yeah, that was a situation where like if I had asked more questions beforehand, been like, so what's the location like? What do you have a space where I can actually shoot this? They would have said, no, we have a hallway. Like there's no room to move. But I managed to do like little dolly shots and all this stuff, and it came out looking pretty cool. But it took me like 4 times as long as I wanted it to.
Yeah. I mean, it just that whole lesson of like, it just sometimes there's no way to know. Like. Yeah, and like you said, that's now to ask those questions. The next time, it's always valuable. So you kind of touched on it a little earlier, but do you have any upcoming projects you can talk about that you're really excited about, or
geez,
any stuff you've done recently that I could plug maybe to give like people a taste of you?
Well, I mean, I have started working with KJAD. They're they're really interesting just because like they're getting into more like social media stuff and doing some in-house production. So I might actually be working with them on some like podcasts, live streams, and their YouTube channel. So they want to start having some like, you know, meet the production team, because when we go to these wedding events, like we just went to one this past weekend, and they were like Steve, who's the he's the head guy. This is kind of interesting. My name's Stefan. Mm-hmm. The head guy's name is Steve, and then the videographer, the first videographer, is Steven. So the three of us are around, and someone just yells a name that starts with an S, and all three of us will
just a meerkat over here.
Yeah. But Steve, the head photographer, he's like walking behind the bride, like holding her gown, like her train, and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. Like he's like making sure the bow tie is perfect on the groom. Like he's really in there, and he's so involved. It's not only a great learning experience, because I do weddings for friends, and like sometimes for hire, like I just get a random request for a wedding, which is awesome. I love those.
Yeah.
But it's a great learning experience, and it's also like a really fun team to work with. Mm-hmm. So like they were so involved with the day that like it made it easier for everyone. The couple was like they were fantastic. They were like, you could kind of tell that like it was a big event, and it was like you could see the kind of stress, but everything that the team did helped ease that stress for them. Mm-hmm. And even though, you know, it's a good gig and all that stuff, it's just like it's so worth it just to have the experience to work with these people, and I'm excited to see what happens with them. So like definitely, I don't know if you feel like checking them out or anything like that, but they've definitely got YouTube and
I'll
all
plug
that
them
stuff.
Again in the description and on the screen. We'll put something up for you to check them out.
Not just any day.